We are in one of my, I guess, favorite chapters. I've probably taught through 1 Corinthians 13 and probably any other chapter of the scripture, only because I go over it every time we meet with premarital couples, and we throw it into weddings, and we throw it everywhere. So I pray that God would speak fresh truth to us and that he would encourage us. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. As Paul wrote, he writes 1 Corinthians, could we close that door? Because I can hear those junior hires right through that open door. Thank you, Frank. Paul writes to the Corinthians 5 years after he established the church. They have questions, he has answers. And so he's dealt with these issues. He's talked about the divisions in the church. He's talked about immorality in the church. He's talked about lawsuits, people suing each other. He's talked about the issue of marriage. He's talked about eating meat, sacrificed to idols. And we're now in a sixth area, which I am titling How to Get Along. That's kind of what I'm calling it, chapters 12, 13, and 14. That's the thing that ties it all together, these chapters, because this is all part of the same thought. It's about getting along. It's about how the church is to get along. It's about how we're all parts of that. Last week we saw in chapter 12 about how we're all parts of the same body. We all have spiritual gifts which help determine what part of the body we are in. And so he's kind of talking about how the church is to function, how we're supposed to work with each other. We all need each other. One part can't say to the other part, I don't need you, or I don't belong because I'm not like you. Well, that's a bunch of baloney. We're all part of the body of Christ. And before he goes on talking more about spiritual gifts, which he will do in chapter 14. He's going to go and do a whole lot more on spiritual gifts. But before he does that, he stopped at the end of the last chapter and he said, earnestly desired the best gifts, yet I show you a more excellent way. Now, I was trying to find a Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure quote. I couldn't find anything. For some reason, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure isn't on YouTube very much. I don't know, or else it's just too old. So I'll just go, excellent. Let's all say that. Excellent. Or excellent dude. Yeah, yeah, air guitars. There we go. So, chapter 13 is the excellent way. This is the more excellent way. Better than gifts. And we'll see by the time we get to the end of the chapter why he's saying this is better than gifts. Gifts are good, don't get me wrong. Spiritual gifts are wonderful. They're beautiful. They're awesome. But this is the best way to be dealing with how to get along. Chapter 13, verse 1. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I have become sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing. Now we'll go back. I wanted to read all those three verses together because they belong together. He talks about having the tongues, the gift of tongues, the tongues of men and of angels. Paul gives us examples of the kinds of things that we would think make people special. That's what I think of all these three verses. These are all things that we would think if somebody has these things, that this makes them pretty special. The gift of tongues is one of those things. And he talks here about the tongues of men and the tongues of angels. So we pick up this little clue here that tongues could be a human language. It could be a non-human language. It could be an angelic language. It doesn't have to be something in a recognizable human language. But he says, if I have the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, and we'll stop here and talk about this word for just a second. The word here for love throughout the chapter is the word agape, agape is the noun. The verb form is agapao, but they're the same word. Agape can be translated brotherly love, affection, goodwill, love, or benevolence. And you've heard this before. The Greeks had all kinds of different words that we tend to translate all of them as love. For example, there's the Greek word eros. We get our word erotic from it, and we would think of sexual kind of thing. And so we use that. We talk about making love to each other. What does that mean? Well, that conjures up images that I'm not going to put on the screen. We think of love in that terms. They would use the word eros. There's a word storge, which is about the kind of love that a family has for each other. It's not a sexual love, but I tell you, it's pretty strong. The stuff that you got for your kids, that you've got for your parents, for your brothers and sisters, storge. This is a family kind of love. The word phileo, it's too complex a word for me to just throw up a single word definition, but I'm going to throw up the word emotional. It is probably more like our word, I love you kind of a thing. That's probably phileo for most of us. You could translate it like. I like some. And Christians throw this around. They'll say, "Well, I love you, but I don't like you." Have you ever heard people say that? I've heard people say that because they know as Christians we're supposed to love everybody. Well, I love you, but I sure don't have to like you. See, yeah, I've heard that too. See, I've heard that. That would be phileo. It's also forms of this are sometimes translated to kiss. Give one another a holy kiss. That's the word phileo. So all these kind of different flavors of the word phileo. But none of these words do justice to the kind of love that God has for us. It's nothing sexual. It's bigger than family. It's more than just emotional. And so the love that God has for us, the love that we're supposed to have for God, the love that we're supposed to have for one another, love one another like I have loved you, that's all agape. And so the early church seems to have adopted a very little known word, not much in Greek literature, this word agape, and has infused it with meaning. And in fact, the big definition of agape is right here in 1 Corinthians 13. This is how we define what agape is all about. Agape is based on commitment, not on feelings. Phileo is feelings. We talk about falling in love. Well, that's feelings. Agape has feelings, but it's not based on feelings. It's based on commitment. It's like in marriage, we actually, it's a big deal that you have vows, that you make promises, that you are making commitment to each other. Some of you, I've done your weddings, and I've made you promise things to each other. I've made you make vows. That's commitment. And see, whether you feel romantic or not doesn't make any difference, because agape is about making a choice. It's about commitment. It has to do with a commitment to give value to somebody. That's really what the commitment's all about. It's that I look at you and I put a price tag on you that's a high value price tag. That's what agape is all about. If you're selling things at a garage sale and you're going through stuff, emptying out the closets, and it's finally time to get rid of grandma's old scarf, and most people would say, I'll give you a nickel for that. But, this is grandma's scarf, so I'm going to charge $95. Now, why am I trying to get rid of it at a garage sale if I'm going to charge $95? But who, can't fault me for trying, But the value is not what you're going to place on it, it's what I place on it. And agape is about choosing to value other people, whether they deserve it or not. That's a part of this commitment, is that I choose to value you. And the commitment of agape is demonstrated with action. It's not just sitting on a sofa. It's action. It's primarily demonstrated by the action of giving. That's the ultimate example of what agape is all about. And you know the verse that shows us this, John 3:16. For God so loved, that's the verb agapao, God so loved the world that he what? That he gave. He gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. This is agape. This is God's kind of love. This is the kind of love that we're supposed to have for each other. This is the love that's the more excellent way. The world was not deserved to be loved by God. The world didn't clean up its act and then God decided to love it. No. This is about undeserved love. God gave his Son because we needed it, not because we deserved it. So when we talk about this love, and you know what? It's hard because some of us are just so stuck on 1 Corinthians 13 about marriage and romance and, my honey and all like that. You got to go past that because in context here, Paul's talking about the church. He's talking about the people sitting in the chair in front of you or on the other side of the room. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about people in church. This is the more excellent way of how we get along. So, he says, if I speak with the tongue of men and of angels, and I do not have love, he says a couple of things. I am a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. One word I want to pick out here is the word for clanging. I thought this was kind of a hoot. The Greek word is alalazo. And literally it means to repeat frequently the cry alala, like soldiers do. You see that in the Mideast. The Muslim guys going alalalalalalalala, something like that. Have you heard that? Do you seen that kind of stuff in the news reports? Crying out like this. Used to enter battle. It can be to utter a joyful sound, to ring loudly, or to clang. And the word for cymbal is we get our word cymbals from the exact words, like a zildjian. It's this big. I'm speaking to a drummer here, so I can use those code words. It's a clanging cymbal. I thought this was, thought this was funny because some people teach people to speak in tongues by saying, Abba, 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 Abba. Just repeat that over and over and over again, or like la 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 la. It's fascinating because he uses that same word here. This is kind of, and not in a complimentary way, by the way. There are a lot of churches that make a big deal out of the gift of tongues. And do not get me wrong. I speak in tongues. I don't know if I can point out other people because I don't want to embarrass other people, but a number of you in here speak or pray in tongues. It's not an uncommon thing in our church. You will hear this sometimes when people are laying hands on people, and you'll hear people doing something underneath their voice, underneath their breath, and they're praying in tongues. I think tongues is a big deal. Paul, we'll get to that next week in chapter 14. He says, I wish that you all spoke in tongues, but, and then he puts some exceptions. And some churches make a really, really big deal out of tongues. Some churches will go so far as to say that you aren't even saved unless you speak in tongues. They will. There are Pentecostal churches that will teach that. Paul says you can have the gift of tongues, but if you do not have agape, he says you're just a bunch of noise. So you got to be careful. We've been kind of pointing these things out at the end of the chapter of last week. Tongues is the last of the gifts. And yet sometimes in some of our churches we make it the first of the gifts, the biggest deal. It's an important thing, but it's at the end. He says in verse 1, he talks about having prophecy. In verse 2, knowledge and faith. Now, when you look at verse 2, don't forget the context of this chapter. Chapter 13, follow me here. This is very, very complicated. Chapter 13 follows chapter 12, and it precedes chapter 14, both of which are all about spiritual gifts. So when he talks about prophecy, knowledge, and faith, he's talking about spiritual gifts. Prophecy, we talked about this last week, speaking for God. Knowledge, not just knowing stuff, but having a special revelation from God, God giving you special knowledge about a situation. When he talks about faith, he's not just talking about general faith or faith to be saved. He's talking about the over and above kind of a thing. And even here he talks about faith to move mountains. He's talking about what Jesus said. For assuredly I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. Now, I don't know if you know anybody who has that much faith. I don't know that I've heard of anybody doing that. I maybe just, have my head in the sand. But that is over and above faith, even though it's just of mustard seed faith. So he says, I could have these gifts, prophecy, knowledge, and faith. And he says, if you have these, if somebody in the church had faith to move mountains, would you think they were pretty special in church? Would you? Yeah. But if they don't have love, they're nothing. They're nothing. Nada. Zip. Nothing. He says, and verse 3 talks about feeding the poor, giving all my possessions to feed the poor, or my body to be burned. These last two examples in verse 3 are not about spiritual gifts, but about demonstrating good works. When Jesus met the rich young ruler, he challenged the man about his own wealth, and he said, when Jesus heard these things, he said to him, you still lack one thing. Sell all that you have and distribute to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come, follow me. It's not a very common thing to have somebody who is wealthy sell it all and give it all to the poor. It happens every once in a while, but it's not a common thing. If somebody did that, you and I would be impressed. This guy used to own Xerox. This guy used to run General Motors. And now he's living in a one-bedroom apartment. And he gave it all away. We would be impressed, wouldn't we? I would be impressed. I would not want to be the guy's friend anymore, because I'm not going to get anything from him. He doesn't have anything, Giving your body to be burned. We call that being a martyr, even though in Greek the word martyr simply means a witness. But if somebody gave their body, willingly stood up and said, okay, take me, ISIS, go ahead, behead me instead of the other guy. We would be impressed if somebody gave their life for another person. And yet Jesus says you can do these things, and if you don't have love, it profits you nothing. Let me flip this around and make the lesson this. The opposite of profiting nothing is profiting a lot. And as you're going to see, Paul's definition of love is not easy. It's easy to look at it and say, well, I've tried that once. But to live in what we're going to read about over the next 5 verses, it's hard, but it's worth it. Because without it, you got nothing. Love is hard. I know. It's very easy to have trouble in your marriage. And maybe some of you are going through a rough patch in your marriage. But this is worth it. It's hard. It is hard as heck, but it is worth it. And remember, this is not really about marriage. This is about the church. It's worth it. Without it, it profits you nothing. It's worthless. Verse 4, love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself and is not puffed up. And so now he begins to unpack his definition of agape. The word for suffers long, it's one Greek word. It's macrothumia. We know of macros, like computer language, macro. Means big or long. Thumeo means burning or passion. And the definition could be to be of a long spirit, not to lose heart, to be patient in bearing the offenses and injuries of others. The lesson, we could say, has to do with difficult people. This word seems to be specifically tied to difficult people. This is not being patient in difficult circumstances. That word comes in at the end. This word is about difficult people, about being patient with difficult people, people that are hard to get along with. Do you know anybody that's hard to get along with? Okay. Let me ask you for another point of honesty. Do you know anybody in the church that's hard to get along with? Yeah, there you go. Oh, come on, let's be honest here. How long have you been a part of this church? Ron West, come on, be honest. Do you know anybody that's hard to get along with? You were looking at the rocking chair. Okay, we love the rocking. Honey, thank you so much for bringing the rocking chair in. That is awesome. That is awesome. But difficult people, that's what this word, macrothumia, if you track the usage in the New Testament, it's always tied to difficult people. It's not difficult circumstances, that's a different word. People who get on your nerves.
Hi.
Patience. Pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
Now, I got to tell you, I'm going to show you a bunch of videos from this values.com. I'm not trying to sell them or push them. It's a secular thing. But they do have some well done little commercials that are very well done. Difficult people. Peter uses this word to describe the patience that God has for us. 2 Peter 3:9, the Lord is not slack. Now here he's talking about why hasn't Jesus come back? Why has he taken so long? And Peter writes, the Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some count slackness, but is long-suffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. In other words, we're kind of hard to get put up with sometimes, but God puts up with us. And if you think about it, let's be honest, did Paul think that Jesus was coming back at any moment? When you read Paul's letters, do you think that Paul thought that Jesus was coming back at any moment? I do. I think so. And he didn't. Why didn't he come back? Because he's patient. How long is God patient? A long time. We're 2,000 years and counting. Well, almost 2,000 years. I guess you got to subtract about 50 years out of that, so it's about 1,950 years. But it's still, that's a lot longer than I can be patient with you for about 5 minutes. Patience. Difficult people. We got to work on that, gang. Being patient with people around us. If you haven't learned this yet, our church, it's only our church. Every other church is filled with perfect people. Our church is filled with really flawed people. Really screwed up people. I'll tell you. Our church is filled with so many screwed up people. And I'm one of them. And in fact, the more you get to know everybody, you realize everybody is quite flawed. There might be one or two people that you really connect with and, wow, this is my bud, But I'll tell you, even your buddies, after a while, are going to get on your nerves. If you've been married for any length of time, there are moments, aren't there? Just a few, when you get on each other's nerves. To be patient, long-suffering towards one another. Because without it, whatever you're doing is worthless. Is this easy? No, it's not. But it's worth it. He says love is patient, love is kind. The Greek word is krestuomai, to show oneself mild, to use kindness. Now, I have to confess that I used to think that the word kindness would be equivalent to seeing somebody sitting on a sofa with a smile on their face. They must be a very kind person. No, you can't tell whether a person is kind by their smile on their face. You can only tell whether a person is kind by what they do. This is an action word. And this is about doing good things. Kindness is doing good things for other people.
7th grade. What was this jumper made of?
Naugahyde.
You let me go to school dressed like a seat cover?
You convinced me that it was groovy. Oh, Edna.
You know, I'm having this wedding here tomorrow, and your weeds are growing through the fence. Do you care?
Think of your fellow man.
I see some things haven't changed.
Put a little love in your heart.
Take this to Edna while I change into my garden clothes.
Oh, please don't.
Why me?
Put a little love in your heart, and the world will be a better place. And the world.
You're planting them too close together.
Edna, it's going to be a beautiful wedding.
Yeah, maybe.
Patience. Pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
Now see, I could use this one for patience too, couldn't I? Because Edna is quite a difficult person to get along with, obviously. We all have Ednas in our life who are always complaining and griping and stuff about stuff. And I love what these gals do. I love what the mom does, because it's actually the daughter has to go along with it. But she gives her a cake, and she gets her gardening clothes on and does something. It's not just being patient, gritting your teeth, but love is kind. Get up and do something. John uses our word agape when he writes, "My little children, let us love," agapao, let us not love in word or in tongue, just because words are cheap, but in deed and in truth. Words are cheap. It's good to love with both words and actions. Love, in verse 4, does not envy. The Greek word zilao means to be heated or to boil with envy, hatred, or anger. The idea of an inner boiling or a burning that starts inside of you when you see something that another person has and you want the same thing for yourself. I think that's especially hard when you're at work and somebody else gets promoted and you don't. Oh man, that's hard. Especially if you thought you deserved to get promoted. Oh man, is that a hard one. You know, they've only been there for 6 months. You've been there for 3 years. That's not fair. I'm the one that deserved it. Love does not envy. It says does not parade itself or is not puffed up. And the lesson here is humility. If all of us are going to stay useful to the Lord, we need to learn the secret of being used by Him, letting Him work through us, and not drawing attention to ourselves, parading ourselves. The problem isn't when we initially start letting Him use us. The problem, I think, usually develops after we start doing something and we don't think we get the recognition or the pat on the back that we deserved. I think that's when it's hardest. You know, I can step out and do that thing that I think God wants me to do, and then nobody says thank you. Or the lead person in that ministry doesn't say, I sure appreciate it. They just kind of act like I was supposed to do it or something like that. Or they just didn't say anything, or they criticized me. Agape is humble enough to not worry about being embarrassed about doing the right thing. That's another aspect of this, not puffed up. Sometimes it's embarrassing to do certain things like this.
Okay, what happened to your passing? You gotta support the puck. Do I have to tell you this? And we're getting killed on the board. This is your territory, Grimson. Do your job. Grimson.
Hello? Hi, honey. What? Now? All right. The itsy bitsy spider climbed up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain. And the itsy bitsy spider climbed up the spout again.
I love you, Daddy.
I love you too, sweetheart. Hey, it's my girl. You know, my daughter.
Love. Pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
I like that. I like that. Love doesn't parade itself. It's not puffed up. And so when you need to do the right thing, even if other people would laugh at you or tease you, you still do the right thing. What does it hurt if you're humble? It doesn't hurt at all. You just go ahead and you do it. Verse 5, love does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil. First thing, does not behave rudely, and the lesson is about good manners. It's talking about doing things properly, doing things politely, not shaming, embarrassing other people with your rude behavior.
Want some more?
What's he doing?
But he can't.
Look at him. It's just not done.
Please, sir, I want some more.
More? More?
More? Please, sir.
He has asked for more!
Thank you.
What?
Well, he did say please, sir.
Yes, he did. And thank you.
Yeah, and thank you.
He's a wonderful boy. I do like the boy.
Please. And thank you. Pass it on.
Good manners in church sometimes involves showing courtesy towards other people. You see just a smidgen of this in the next chapter, in 1 Corinthians 14:30. If someone is prophesying and another person receives a revelation from the Lord, the one who is speaking must stop. In this way, all who prophesy will have a turn to speak one after the other so that everyone will learn and be encouraged. Everyone gets a turn. Sometimes when you're in a small group, the group leader might open things up for people to share. Maybe to discuss things. Maybe to a bunch of people could be praying for something. And every once in a while, you'll get someone in a group who wants all the attention. And they want to be the one that answers all the question, or the one who prays the longest prayer and keeps going on and on and on. And I don't know if you've ever been, I've been in groups like that where I wish they would shut up because I would like to pray. Just give me 3 words. I just want to pray 3 words for this person. But you can't because the other person just goes on and on and on. You understand what I'm saying? This is about getting along in church. Remember, that's what 1 Corinthians 13 is all about, getting along in church. We have to work at this. Does not behave rudely. It's part of proper manners. It says, verse 5, also love does not seek its own. And the lesson's about others first. Love is more concerned about other people's rights than its own. Paul wrote in Philippians chapter 2, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. In marriage, Sometimes we get into such trouble because sometimes all we think about is ourselves. And all we think about are my needs not being met. And you know what? Nothing will destroy relationships quicker, I don't think, than selfishness. When you're hearing yourself out of your mouth saying, but I have rights, there's a problem. There's a problem. You need to be asking yourself, what's the other person's right? What do they need? Because that's what agape is about. That's about that commitment that you made to each other. That's really what this is supposed to be about here in church. Each other's needs. Others first. Love does not seek its own. It says love is not provoked. The idea here is that, again, if you're doing agape, you're patient with people, and you don't get too quickly provoked to anger. It says in verse 5, love thinks no evil. Now I was thinking about, I could throw up some monkey things, hear no evil, see no evil, something like that. Thinks no, I don't know how you do thinks no evil, but the word for thinks, logizomai is the Greek word. And it's an accounting word. It's a mathematician word. It means to reckon, to count, to compute, to calculate, to count over something. It's describes putting, I don't know if anybody even uses check registers anymore. Does anybody even write checks? I don't know. Does anybody in here write checks? Mark, you write checks. Now I know you would because you're like Mr. Okay, I get that. It's like writing down those numbers in your check register. Here, that's the concept of what logizomai, what it can be about. And I'm going to call the lesson keeping short lists. If you agape somebody, if you love someone, you don't keep track of the number of times you've been offended. 1 Corinthians 13:5, this is the New Living Translation, translates this phrase this way: it keeps no record of being wronged. This will tend to come to the surface when you have fights or disagreements with others. When you start hearing yourself, when you pull out the laundry list and you say, this is the 100th time this week, or actually, it's the 23rd time this week, because I've written it down. In fact, here it is, and you pull out the list, and all the different times that you've left the toilet seat up, or whatever it is. You let the little things get under your skin, and you just start keeping records. You need to keep short lists of gripes. Paul writes in Ephesians 4:31, get rid of bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. Instead, be kind. That's that Christos word. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God through Christ has forgiven you. And actually, I believe in here in verse 32, the word for forgiving, it's charizomai, which it's not the normal word for forgiving. This is the word for gracing. We get our word to grace is charis. This is the verb form of charis. It's showing grace towards somebody. And here's the idea of forgiving other people. It's undeserved favor. You don't deserve to be forgiven, but I forgive you anyway.
Oh! Your fault.
My fault?
Okay, verse 6 says, love does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. Does not rejoice in iniquity. You know what? Sometimes there's something in us that just loves to hear bad news about people. It's what makes gossip fun. That one person who thought they were so hot, and now they got their head in the mud right now, and they're having a hard. It's just kind of fun to hear that kind of stuff every once in a while. No. Love doesn't rejoice in iniquity. We ought to be grieved when we hear bad news. We ought to be. When you hear about some person who's stumbled and fallen, instead of thinking, well, see, I always knew they were a hypocrite. Well, yeah, but so are you. I mean, we're all hypocrites at some to some level, to some degree. We have to be grieved when we hear bad news. Love does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. We've talked about this a lot of times. Ephesians 4:15 says that truth is what helps us grow up. Speaking the truth in love, that's how we grow up. The problem is that sometimes the truth hurts, especially when it's truth about you. Sometimes that hurts. And some of us, me included, are very sensitive. So if you're going to criticize me, don't. I just got to tell you right up front, don't, because I will withdraw and cry and complain to my wife, and I will be bummed for 3 weeks straight if anybody. So don't criticize me, okay? So what I'm about to say, this doesn't apply to me. I just want to let you know this. It's hard when you're extra sensitive and someone brings up a flaw that you have. And to be honest, I can't remember the fancy schmancy psychological word. I wish Darnell was here because he could tell me the word. Some people like to control other people with carefully placed criticism. They're really good at putting people in their place, and it's almost like satanic, because Satan is the accuser of the brethren. And some people are just really good at always laying guilt trips on you, so you're always off balance, and so they can control you and stuff like that. I understand that. That's not what I'm talking about. But see, sometimes criticism is right. Sometimes the comment is correct. It's something that I pray for myself, that I would be open to criticism instead of cringing like I tell you that I do. And I'm not. Don't go testing me on this. Don't go testing me, and afterwards, well, I'm going to see how well you're doing on being open to criticism. Jacob, put that pencil away. Stop writing that down. Sometimes criticism comes from people who actually care about you. Proverbs 27:6 says, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful." And sometimes that criticism is actually the thing you needed to hear. And love rejoices in the truth. I haven't got really good at this yet. I'm working on it. Love rejoices with the truth. Verse 7, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. The word bears all things, the Greek word is stego, and it means to cover, to protect or to keep by covering, or to cover over with silence. And I don't really get why they call this bearing all things, because it's almost like being patient or something. But it's about covering, and the lesson is about covering sin. I got to be careful here in how I define this. Love is reluctant to drag into the light the faults and the mistakes of others. Some people are just really quick to point it out and call up the press and tweet about things and stick it on Facebook and look what this person did, blah, 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 blah. And what I'm saying doesn't mean that we turn a blind eye when there's something that needs to be fixed or changed. This whole thing over the last 20 years about the Catholic Church and the abuses that went on, in past years. They might be saying, well, they were doing what this says. We're covering sin. Well, sometimes you need to. You don't cover sin until you've dealt with it. We need to confront things that need to change. We need to be careful about how we go about it. Not quickly or dragging the mess into public view initially. You have to be careful about how you do things. And when a person has confessed, when they've turned from their sin, when they've paid the price, because sometimes a price needs to be paid. Sometimes somebody needs to go to jail. Sometimes that's the right thing to do. But when a person has done all those things, then there's a time to just be quiet about it. I think that's what Peter means when he says this, above all things, have fervent love for one another, for love will cover a multitude of sins. And he's quoting from Proverbs there. Love bears all things. Love covers all things. You know, I remember years ago when I worked at McDonnell Douglas. The guys would all complain about their wives. That was like their favorite pastime at lunch hour. And we were all a bunch of 20-year-old guys, 25-year-old guys. And the guys would all talk about it at lunch. We go out to lunch and they rag on the old ball and chain, I can't remember you won't believe what the old hag said to me yesterday, blah, 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 blah. I remember one, and I remember thinking, wow, I'm sure glad I'm not married to the woman that they're married to. My wife's nothing like that. Oh my gosh. And I remember one guy in particular, he used to just talk so negative about his wife. And one Friday afternoon, because we'd go out to lunch on Fridays, one Friday afternoon we went out to lunch and he invited his wife along. And she was the sweetest, kindest, gentlest Christian woman that you could ever imagine. And I remember thinking, man, oh man. When your friends meet your spouse, do they say to themselves, wow, I always wonder what the snake looked like? Or are they thinking to themselves, so this is what that Prince Charming looked like? See, that kind of depends on how you're running this thing. How do you, and here we're even talking about it in the church. How do we talk about each other? I think sometimes I'm a little bit too negative about what I say about some of you. Love bears all things. Got to be quick, got to be careful about how you're talking about people. Love believes all things. And I guess the short of this, I think this is believing the best. Giving somebody the benefit of the doubt. I think that's the gist behind it. Love hopes all things. I guess one way you could look at this maybe is that love doesn't lose hope for those that it loves. It keeps at it. And love endures all things. We talked about back at the very beginning of the section, verse 4, where love is patient. We talked about how macrothumia is just about people, patience with difficult people. And I said that there was another word that talked about patience in difficult times. That's this word. Hupomone or hupomeno or is the verb. Hupomone is the noun. Hupomeno. Hupo means under. Meno is the word for remain or abide. And it carries the idea of to stay under tough times and not to run, to persevere, to keep going through it. You stay under. You remain under the pressure. And the lesson is that love doesn't run. When things get tough, we sometimes want to run. We want to bail. Some of us, we've had these discussions about people who leave the church because they have argument with somebody, And I understand it. I get it. And I make my living by showing up here, so I kind of have to stay. That's the hard thing about being on staff, because you have to stay. I don't get my paycheck if I just run. There's been times where I've been tempted to, but just because I want to keep getting my paycheck, I stay. But in staying, I have learned an awful lot about myself. And how I need to change, how I need to grow. And really, we all kind of need that same mentality. We cheat ourselves sometimes because we run, because we bail, because we say, oh, it's just too hard. I can't do this. And don't get me wrong, there are times where you need to move on. I get it. And if you're in an unhealthy situation, sometimes you got to move, sometimes you got to change. But sometimes we grow best by staying under it Isn't that how they say like diamonds are made, with carbon being under pressure? It's kind of like the same thing in your life. There were two travelers who had a fearful encounter with a huge bear. One traveler, a guy was totally afraid, and he climbed his way up into a high tree and didn't even think about his friend. He just climbed up to the tree. The other guy didn't have a chance to go anywhere, but he started thinking about how bears often lose interest in dead people, so he fell to the ground and he pretended that he was dead. The bear comes alongside the guy and starts nuzzling and sniffs the guy's face and his ears. Thinking the man to be dead, the bear finally walked away. When the bear was long gone, the man up in the tree climbed down and he asked his friend what the bear had whispered to him, because he said, he kind of looked like he was whispering something in your ear. What did he say? And the guy said, well, it's no secret what he told me. What he said is that I should be careful about having friends who, when danger comes, leave and run. See, love doesn't run. Love sticks it out. It endures all things. Verse 8, love never fails, but whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledge, it will vanish away. And let's talk about that last part first, about things failing, ceasing, and vanishing away. In the last chapter, Paul was talking a lot about spiritual gifts and how they affect the makeup and the ministry of the church. Yet spiritual gifts, like prophecy, tongues, and the word of knowledge, will one day be unnecessary. There will be a day when we will not need spiritual gifts, or especially these spiritual gifts. They're going to stop. They're going to stop functioning. They're going to stop being needed. And Paul's going to explain this a little bit in the next couple of verses. So I'm not going to go into too much detail first about the failing and the ceasing. But having said that, one day gifts are going to stop. One day the gifts are going to stop. And that's why when he says at the beginning, love never fails. See, sometimes we look at this and we think, well, that means, love always wins. Love never fails. I'll just keep loving, and one day they will change. God's love is a pretty powerful thing, but people can resist it. And many people do. Most of the world does. And you can love people with agape love, and there is no guarantee that they're going to change. That's the truth. So I don't think that that's what this is talking about. I think this is talking about, in context, this idea that since prophecy, tongues, and the gift of knowledge are going to one day cease, unlike spiritual gifts, agape is not going to cease. Agape love is going to continue through eternity. And that's why it's the more excellent way. Trying to figure out spiritual gifts and all that kind of stuff, well, that's okay, that's cool. But when we get to heaven, we ain't going to be using spiritual gifts. We will be probably still using agape, even though I don't know how many of you will still be hard to put up with. I might give you a hard time, I don't know. He says, for we know in part, and he's talking about these things ceasing. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect has come, then that which is in part will be done away. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as also I am known. Now let's put this all together. Knowing and prophesying, back in verse 9, knowing and prophesying in part. Spiritual gifts like word of knowledge, gift of prophecy are necessary because we don't know everything yet. We don't understand everything yet. Does everybody agree with that? Do you all agree that we don't understand everything yet? We only have a partial knowledge of God. Even the smartest among us. We were talking about this the other day. Even if we read all that there's, you can't read all that's ever been written about Jesus. You can't. There's too much. We only have a partial knowledge about God. You got that? You agree with that? We've only got a partial knowledge, at least for now. he says, when that which is perfect has come, then the partial will be done away with. Now, this is the phrase that determines when spiritual gifts will cease. There's a reason I'm making a point about this because, well, you'll see in a second. This is what determines, is this thing, this perfect thing. When the perfect thing comes, then the partial things will be done away. These spiritual gifts are the partial things that will be replaced by the perfect, whatever the perfect is. Now, you all read those verses with me, right? Look at those verses again. Look at verses especially 11 and 12. Do you have an idea of what the perfect thing is? You want to hazard a guess? Let's see if you can beat the scholars at their own game. Can you tell me what the perfect thing, when the perfect thing comes and the partial is done away, what's the perfect thing? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Go ahead. I'll try to be gentle on you. And if you can accept the criticism on my part. Because love rejoices in the truth, you know. Go ahead. Yes! Good job. High five. High five. When we get to heaven, when we're complete, when we're perfect, or when we see Jesus, when he comes back, whichever comes first, either his return and we get changed, or when we go to heaven. You can tell from the context, it's related to the idea of a child becoming a man. It's related to the idea of seeing face to face. It's related to this idea of being fully known. And these are things that happen when we get to heaven or when Jesus returns. Would you agree with that? Does that sound reasonable to you? Do you see that in the context? Or am I forcing this on you? Do you see how you come to that conclusion? You're not so sure? Yes? No? You're asleep. You're thinking he's got 5 minutes. Can you wrap this up in 5 minutes? Yeah, I know how you think. Okay. We will be fully mature. We will be grown up when we have our resurrected bodies. Paul talks about our resurrected bodies being the full plant, while these current bodies are just like little seeds. So it's kind of a picture of growing up. He says, so also is the resurrection of the dead. The body is sown in corruption, it is raised in incorruption. So the idea of coming from a child to becoming a man, that's when you're all growed up, is when you're in your resurrected body, when you're in heaven. We will see him face to face when we get to heaven. Revelation 22:4, they shall see his face, and his name shall be on their forehead. That's when you see God face to face, is when you're in heaven. We will have full knowledge. We know that when he is revealed, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. That's when we have full knowledge. Why am I saying this? Is because there are some people who teach that the spiritual gifts are no longer functioning today like they did in the early church. And they will say that the perfect thing is the Bible. They will do this from Psalm 19:7, which says, the law of the Lord is what? Is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. They'll take that verse and patch it to in this verse where when the perfect thing comes and the partial is done away. Well, what's the perfect thing? It's the Word of God. When the perfect comes, the partial is done away. Do you follow the logic on that? Now, and what they will then say is that when the church finally agreed on what we call the canon, which is when they all agreed on what all the books of the Bible really were, because that's called the canon. That didn't happen until 8300. That's when a church councils finally did all their arguing and all decided that, okay, the book of James is Scripture. Shucks. The book of James won out. The book of Hebrews won, and the books that you now consider your Bible, people argued over them for years. And so they will say that when the canon was complete, even though they were already written 200 years earlier, that when the canon was complete, the perfect came and we no longer needed the partial. That's the way the argument goes. One of many problems I have with that is they base this on Psalm 19:7. When did David write Psalm 19:7. He wrote it around 1000 BC, long before the canon. Even 1,000 years before spiritual gifts. Do you follow my logic here? Am I making sense? Did you follow the logic? If David is saying the law of the Lord is perfect, not the law of the Lord will be perfect, but is perfect. Wait a minute, that was 1000 BC. So how can you take that and squeeze it into what Paul's saying and saying, well, at 300 AD, that's when it became perfect, and then we no longer need spiritual gifts. And they will say that God's word is all that we need. We no longer need prophecy or word of knowledge or these knowledge type of gifts or the gift of tongues because we have the Bible. That's the argument. The problem is, I hope I didn't twist your arms too much. I think you all agreed with me before I showed you this, that the perfect thing was when Jesus comes back. That's the context, correct? When Jesus comes back, we will have perfect knowledge and we won't need spiritual gifts. We won't need a word of knowledge. We won't need to have a word from God through prophecy because we'll be seeing him face to face. Does that make sense? Okay. He talks about in verse 11, I put away childish things. He's saying that on this side of heaven, we're like children. When we get to heaven and Jesus returns, we will have graduated into full adulthood. We will have full knowledge, not partial knowledge. We will have no need for gifts like the word of knowledge and prophecy because we will have complete knowledge. In verse 12, he says, we see in a mirror dimly. On this side of heaven, things aren't real clear all the time, are they? Sometimes you wonder, what is God doing? Who is God really like? I don't have this figured out. It's like I'm looking through a fogged up mirror or something. When we get to heaven, things will be clear because we'll see him face to face and we won't need these spiritual gifts. Verse 13, and now abide faith, hope, love, these three, but the greatest of these is love. And so the idea is that faith, hope, love, unlike spiritual gifts, which will pass away, we're always going to need faith, I guess. We're always going to need hope, I guess. And we're going to need love. And the greatest of those three things is love. And with that, we're done. Let's stand and pray.